The house was supposed to be silent at that hour. At 3 in the morning, even the walls of the vast mansion usually slept. But that night, something felt different. Strange enough to pull billionaire Adrian Cole out of his restless thoughts and down the polished staircase he rarely used. He wasn't sure what he expected to find. Maybe a flickering light he'd forgotten to turn off, or the echo of his own uneasiness. But he didn't expect this. He didn't expect to hear the slow, careful clinking of dishes coming from the kitchen, as if someone was trying very hard not to wake anybody. Adrian paused at the bottom step, listening. The sound didn't match any of the staff he knew. His employees moved with confidence, not fear. But this sounded small, nervous, almost tired. He walked quietly toward the kitchen, the marble floor cold beneath his feet. When he reached the doorway, he froze. There, standing on a wooden stool and barely tall enough to reach the sink, was a little girl. Her sleeves were rolled up, her thin arms covered in soap suds, her dark hair tied in a messy ponytail that looked like it had been done in a hurry. She was washing dish after dish, blinking hard to stay awake. For a moment, Adrian didn't move. He just watched her, trying to breathe past the tightness forming in his chest. He knew her, or at least he had seen her a handful of times, hiding behind her mother whenever they crossed paths. She was Anna, the maid's daughter, Elena's child. Elena, the young woman who had joined the staff just 6 months ago. Quiet, polite, always keeping her head down. He had never seen her cause trouble, never seen her raise her voice. But he also never knew she brought her daughter this early in the morning, or that the little girl worked beside her. Adrian stepped forward, clearing his throat softly so he wouldn't startle her. But Anna still jumped, the plate in her hand slipping into the soapy water with a splash. "Yes, sir? I'm sorry," she whispered quickly, her voice shaking. "I'm almost done. Please don't be mad." Mad? Adrian didn't even know what to say. He wasn't angry. He was confused, concerned, and suddenly, painfully aware that he might not know as much about the people in his own home as he thought. "It's okay," he said gently. "What are you doing here at this hour? Where is your mother?" Anna looked down, biting her lip. "She told me to sleep in the staff room. But I couldn't. There were too many dishes left. She'll get in trouble if you see them in the morning." Her words hit him harder than he expected. The mansion had a dishwasher big enough to clean everything from a dinner party in one go. No one had to wash anything by hand. Why was she doing this? And why on earth was a child taking responsibility for her mother's work? Adrian felt a knot tighten in his throat as he gently took the sponge from her hand. "You should be sleeping," he said softly. "You have school tomorrow." She didn't answer. Instead, she shifted nervously on her stool, her small fingers twisting together. Adrian waited, giving her time. When she finally spoke, her voice was even smaller than before. I don't have school tomorrow." He frowned. "It's a weekday." "I know." There was something in the way she said it, something that made the room suddenly feel colder. Adrian crouched down so he was eye level with her. He could see the exhaustion on her face, the kind a child her age should never have to carry. "Anna," he said carefully, "why did you skip school?" Her eyes lifted to his for just a second, wide and filled with something he couldn't quite name. Fear? Shame? Something else? "I didn't skip," she said quietly. I can't go anymore." The sentence didn't make sense. Children didn't just stop going to school out of nowhere, and when they did, it was never for a good reason. Adrian's heartbeat quickened, the weight of something unknown pressing onto his chest. "What do you mean?" he asked. Anna took a deep breath, as if preparing herself to say something she wasn't supposed to. Her tiny hands trembled. For a moment, it looked like she might cry. But before she could answer, another voice echoed softly from behind them. "Anna." Elena stood in the doorway, her uniform still on, her face pale and tired. She must have run all the way from the hallway, because she was breathing fast, her eyes wide with panic. She stepped into the light, her hands trembling as she pulled her daughter close. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said immediately. "I didn't mean for you to see this. She should be in bed. She won't do it again." Adrian stared at her, more confused than before. "Elena," he said calmly, "why is your daughter working at this hour? And why isn't she going to school?" Elena didn't answer. Instead, she closed her eyes as if bracing herself, holding Anna tightly. The silence stretched, long and heavy. Something was wrong. He could feel it. Something deeper than a child washing dishes. Something bigger than a skipped school day. "Elena," he tried again, "whatever it is, I just want to understand." Her lips trembled. She looked from him to her daughter, then back again. I will explain," she whispered. "But not here, and not tonight. Please." Adrian wasn't used to being told to wait. He wasn't used to being in the dark about anything happening under his own roof. But something in Elena's voice stopped him from pushing further. It wasn't disrespect. It wasn't fear of losing her job. It was something heavier. Something like desperation. She gently guided Anna toward the hallway, murmuring that she needed to rest. Adrian watched them leave, his mind racing with questions he couldn't shake off. Why would a maid hide something from him? Why was her daughter exhausted, working past midnight? And what could possibly be serious enough to pull a child out of school without warning? As the kitchen light flickered slightly, Adrian stood alone in the quiet room, the cold tile beneath his bare feet grounding him in a reality he didn't fully understand yet. But one thing was clear. Whatever secret Elena was holding, it was big, and he wasn't sure he was ready for the truth when it finally came. Adrian didn't go back to sleep after Elena took Anna away. He stood in the dim kitchen for a long time, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the quiet ticking of the wall clock. Something about the moment felt heavier than anything he had dealt with in a long time. He was a billionaire who could solve most problems with a phone call or signature, yet he suddenly felt powerless. A child working at 3 a.m, a child who said she couldn't go to school anymore, and a mother who looked like she was breaking from the inside, just trying to hold everything together. He turned off the sink light, but the uneasiness followed him like a shadow. When he returned to his bedroom, he didn't bother lying down. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring out at the dark silhouette of the city skyline beyond his window. He knew his mansion was a world of comfort and privilege, but what had he missed happening right under his own roof? By the time the sun rose, casting soft gold light across the room, he had made a decision. He needed answers, not as a boss and not as a billionaire, as a human being who couldn't ignore what he saw. The day started just like any other at the mansion. Staff members moved through the halls quietly, carrying out their tasks. Adrian walked into the dining room, but instead of breakfast, he found himself scanning faces. Elena wasn't there. He waited, pretending to read emails on his phone, but his attention kept drifting toward the kitchen doorway. Finally, she appeared, but not in the way he expected. She walked slowly, her shoulders stiff, her face pale with worry. She greeted him politely, but she kept her eyes down, avoiding his gaze. Adrian watched her closely. There was something in the way she moved, something tired, something careful, like she was carrying a secret too heavy for her thin frame. "Good morning, sir," she whispered, placing a tray on the table. "Elena," Adrian said softly, "sit with me for a moment." She froze. He could see panic flash across her face. She nodded slowly but didn't sit. Instead, she stood at a respectful distance, her hands clasped tightly together. "What you saw last night," she began, her voice unsteady. "I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Anna will not wash dishes or touch any work in the future. I will make sure of it." "That's not what I'm worried about," Adrian said gently. "I'm worried about her, and I'm worried about you." For the first time since she entered the room, her eyes lifted slightly, just enough for him to see the exhaustion hiding inside them. She shook her head quickly, as if denying the chance to share anything. "We're fine, sir. We're grateful for the job. Please don't trouble yourself with our personal matters." "But I already am," he said quietly. "A child doesn't stop going to school for no reason, and a mother doesn't look as terrified as you did last night without something serious happening." Elena's breath hitched. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. For a moment, it seemed like she might speak, but then she stepped back. "I should get to work," she murmured, almost in a whisper. Before he could stop her, she slipped out of the room, disappearing down the hallway. Adrian sat there, the untouched breakfast in front of him growing cold. He didn't want to pressure her, but the worry sitting in his chest refused to fade. Later that afternoon, he found himself wandering toward the staff quarters, a place he rarely went. He didn't have a reason except that something inside him needed to understand. He walked past a narrow hallway lined with small rooms until he saw one door slightly open. Inside, Anna sat cross-legged on the bed, coloring quietly in a worn notebook. The moment she saw him, she straightened up, her small face tightening with nervousness. "Sir," she said softly. He stepped into the doorway, but didn't cross the threshold. "Hi, Anna. I just came to check on you." She gave a faint smile, though the sadness in her eyes stayed. "I'm okay." "You must be tired," he said gently. "Last night was very late." She nodded. "But Mama said I don't have to help today." "You shouldn't have to help at all," he replied. "You should be resting. You should be going to school like other kids your age." Again, that flicker of pain crossed her face. She looked down at her hands, her voice small as she said, "Other kids don't have the same problems we do." Adrian felt something twist inside him. "What kind of problems, Anna?" Before she could answer, footsteps echoed behind him. Elena appeared, her face full of alarm. "Anna!" "Sweetheart, go to the kitchen," she said quickly. Anna hesitated, glancing at Adrian, then obeyed. When she was gone, Elena took a deep breath. "Sir, please," she said quietly. "We can't talk here." "Not now." She looked around nervously, as if afraid someone was listening. Adrian frowned. "Elena, no one here would harm you. If something is wrong, I can help." She shook her head, stepping back into the small room and closing the door behind her. "You can't fix everything, sir." Her words surprised him, not because they were disrespectful, they weren't, but because they sounded like a truth she believed with every piece of her heart. "Elena," he said, softening his voice, "I'm not asking as your employer. I'm asking as someone who cares. Why isn't Anna in school? Is someone threatening you? Are you struggling financially? Whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone." Her eyes filled with tears. She tried hard to blink away. "You shouldn't get involved." "But I already am," he said again. She turned away, brushing at her face. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "There are things you don't know, things I can't explain yet. If I tell you, everything could get worse. For me, for Anna." His heart sank. Worse than a child washing dishes at 3 a.m? She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Much worse." Adrian stepped closer, lowering his voice to a calm, steady tone. "You and Anna are safe here. You have my word." Elena looked back at him, her expression torn between fear and hope. For a moment, he thought she might finally tell him the truth, but then a sharp knock echoed from down the hall. Elena's face instantly drained of color. She stiffened, her breathing quickening, her hands shaking subtly. "We're not supposed to have visitors today," she whispered. Adrian turned toward the noise, but Elena grabbed his arm, not forcefully, but with desperate grip. "Please," she whispered urgently, "don't let anyone know you were here. Don't ask questions right now. Not until I know what they want." "They," he repeated. "Who is they, Elena?" Another knock, louder this time. Elena closed her eyes, as if bracing herself for something she'd been dreading. "Please go," she begged softly. Adrian hesitated, torn between staying and respecting her fear. "Elena!" "Go!" she said again, her voice barely holding together. He stepped out of the room, confusion and worry swirling through his chest. As he turned the corner, he heard the door down the hall open, followed by a low voice he didn't recognize, calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. "Elena," the man said, "we need to talk." Adrian paused, hidden from view, listening as the tension in Elena's silence filled the hallway like a thick fog. He still didn't know the truth. But whatever Anna and her mother were hiding, it wasn't small. And now, someone else had come looking for them. Adrian moved quietly down the hallway, but every instinct in him stayed alert. He didn't want to leave. He didn't want to abandon Elena in a moment where her hands trembled and her voice cracked. But she had asked him to go, and something told him she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him. That thought alone made the tension in his chest grow heavier. He stood at the corner, hidden behind the wall, listening to the deep voice that had entered the staff quarters. It wasn't one of his security guards. It wasn't any of the estate managers. He knew every person who worked for him, and this man's tone didn't match any of them. "Elena," the man repeated, his voice steady but firm. "You weren't supposed to delay this." Adrian could barely hear her reply, but her voice was fragile, like she was choosing every word with caution. I told you I needed more time." "You've already had too much time," the man said, "and your daughter missing school is raising questions. People have started talking." A coldness settled in Adrian's stomach. Did this man know Anna wasn't attending school? Was he the reason? "I'm doing everything I can," Elena whispered. I need a little longer." There was a pause. Then the man spoke again, slower this time. "We don't give extensions, Elena. You know that." The hall grew so still that Adrian could hear his heartbeat echoing in his ears. He had no idea what they were talking about, but the fear in Elena's voice made it clear. It wasn't something small. And whatever this man wanted, Elena didn't have it. "I'll come back tomorrow," the man said coldly, "and I expect an answer. You know what the consequences are." A quiet gasp escaped Elena as if the word consequences carried something terrifying behind it. Adrian stepped back quickly as the man exited the staff hallway, walking briskly toward the back door of the mansion. He wore simple clothing, nothing that suggested he belonged there. Yet he moved with confidence, like someone who had been there before. Someone who wasn't worried about being caught. The door clicked shut, and silence washed over the hall. Adrian waited a few seconds before walking back toward Elena's room. Her door was still partly open. When he stepped inside, she was sitting on the edge of her bed, her hands shaking as she tried to wipe her tears. "Elena," he said softly. She looked up suddenly, startled. "Sir, I told you to go." "I did," he said gently, "but I heard some of it." Her breath caught. She stood quickly, shaking her head. "You shouldn't be involved." "Please, sir, I'm begging you." "Elena, someone came into my home and threatened you," Adrian said, keeping his voice calm but firm. "If you think I'm going to ignore that, you're wrong." She pressed her palm to her forehead, her shoulders collapsing under the weight of the situation. "I didn't want you to hear anything. You're making this harder." "I can make it safer," he replied quietly. "But I need to understand what you're dealing with." She didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward the window and pulled the curtain aside slightly, as if checking whether the man was still outside. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "There are people I owe something to. People who don't forgive easily." "What do you owe them?" Adrian asked. Her eyes filled again. "Money, but it's more complicated than that." He waited, letting her continue at her own pace. "When Anna got sick last year," she whispered, "I had no choice. I borrowed money from the only people who would lend it to me. It was supposed to be small, temporary. But the interest," she paused, swallowing hard, "the interest is more than I can ever repay." Adrian's jaw tightened. He wasn't surprised. People in desperate situations often fell into the hands of those who took advantage of them. But what bothered him more was the fact that someone was coming into his mansion to pressure her. "And Anna," he asked gently, "is that why she stopped going to school?" Elena nodded slowly, her voice breaking. "I couldn't afford the fees anymore. And then the men started showing up near her school, watching her. I got scared. I pulled her out because I didn't know what they were planning." A small shiver ran down Adrian's spine. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked up, the sorrow in her eyes raw. "Because people like me don't ask for help from people like you. And I was afraid they'd come after you too if they knew you were involved." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Elena, you and your daughter aren't alone anymore. Whatever this is, I can help you deal with it." "No," she said quickly, wiping her tears again. "You don't understand. They don't just want their money. They want control. Once you step in, it won't stop. They'll start looking at you. And I can't let that happen. A soft creak sounded from the doorway. Adrian turned to see Anna standing there, holding her notebook against her chest. Her eyes, still swollen from lack of sleep, shifted quickly between her mother and Adrian. "Mama, is everything okay?" she asked quietly. Elena quickly forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Everything is fine, sweetheart. Go sit on the bed." Anna didn't move. She kept watching the two of them, as if she understood more than they thought. "Is it the man again?" she asked softly. Elena froze. Adrian felt his heart sink. "How many times has he been here?" he asked gently. Anna hugged her notebook. "He comes a lot. Mama always tells me to hide." "Elena," Adrian said, trying to stay calm, "this is not just a dead issue. This is a threat to your safety, to Anna's safety." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "I know, but if you try to fight them, they'll hurt someone." Adrian exhaled slowly. "Then we'll be smart about it." But Elena stepped back, fear shining in her eyes. "Please don't. Please, sir. I can handle it." He knew she couldn't. The fear in her voice, the exhaustion in her face, the way Anna clung to her, it all painted a picture of someone holding everything together by a thread. The mansion suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls had drawn closer. Adrian realized the main conflict wasn't just about a child washing dishes or skipping school. This was bigger, dangerous, and happening right under his nose. He walked toward the door, taking a moment to think. "Elena," he said finally, "I'll respect your space, but I won't ignore what's happening. Tomorrow, I'm sending someone I trust to look into this." "No," she whispered quickly, terrified. "Sir, please." But Adrian didn't turn back. He couldn't fix everything, but he could no longer stand by and watch her and her daughter drown in fear. What he didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that someone else had already noticed his concern. Someone who had been watching the mansion from a distance. Someone who didn't want him getting involved. Adrian barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena's trembling hands and Anna's frightened eyes. The mansion, usually quiet and peaceful after dark, felt different now. Tight, watchful, like something unseen was pressing against the walls. Even the softness of the night lights seemed sharper, as if the house itself sensed danger approaching. He walked through the halls long after midnight, thinking through every possibility. He had handled business crises, financial crashes, even public scandals, but this felt personal. This wasn't about numbers or deals. This was about a mother and her daughter who had been suffering silently under his roof. And someone from outside, someone with power over them, was closing in. Around 3 a.m, Adrian stepped onto the balcony overlooking the garden. The night air was cold, carrying the faint scent of wet earth. As he folded his arms, his eyes automatically scanned the perimeter. He told himself it was habit, instinct, but deep down he knew he was expecting something. He didn't have to wait long. Near the far corner of the garden, a figure moved, slow, careful, blending with the shadows behind the hedges. The motion was small, easy to miss, but not for a man as alert as Adrian. He narrowed his eyes, trying to see more clearly, but before he could make out the person's face, they slipped behind a tree and disappeared. A chill slid down his spine. Someone was watching the house, and it wasn't one of his guards. The next morning, he called Marcus, his most trusted security advisor, the only person who knew how to be discreet. When Marcus arrived, he instantly sensed Adrian's tension. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Adrian didn't waste time. Someone was in the garden last night. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here. Marcus's expression hardened. "Inside the property?" "Yes. And Elena is being threatened by someone connected to a debt. A man came into the staff quarters yesterday. I need you to find out who he is without drawing attention." Marcus nodded slowly, his mind already working. But then he asked, "Do Elena and the girl know you're getting involved?" "They don't want me to be," Adrian admitted. "They're scared it will make things worse." Marcus hesitated a moment before speaking. "Then you need to be careful. These kinds of people. If they think someone with your status is interfering, they won't back down. They'll push harder." Adrian looked toward the hallway leading to the staff quarters. "That's what I'm afraid of." Later that day, the mansion felt unusually quiet. The staff moved more cautiously, almost as if the tension in the air had settled into the walls. Elena was working in the laundry room when Adrian found her. She kept her eyes lowered, folding towels with a focus that looked forced. "Elena," he said gently. She didn't look up. "Sir, please. I told you yesterday." "There was someone in the garden last night," he interrupted. "Someone watching the house. I'm involved whether you want me to be or not." Her hands froze mid-fold. Slowly, she turned to him. "You weren't supposed to see that." "See what?" he asked. She swallowed hard. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They don't just come to talk, sir. They keep watch. They want to make sure I don't run. They said they'd take Anna if I tried." Adrian felt a flash of anger he hadn't expected. "They threatened your child?" She nodded once, quickly, as if afraid even that gesture would be overheard. "That's why you stopped sending her to school," he said quietly. "I couldn't risk it," she murmured. "Every time Anna walked outside, I was afraid something would happen to her." Adrian exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "What do they want now?" Elena closed her eyes. "The debt, all of it, immediately. They gave me until tomorrow to pay." "Tomorrow?" His voice tightened. "Elena, that's impossible." "I know," she whispered. "And they know, too. That's why I'm scared." He wanted to tell her he would pay the debt instantly. It would be nothing for him, less than a dinner bill, maybe, but something held him back. Something in her face, in her fear, in the way she watched the door every few seconds. "They don't want the money anymore, do they?" he said softly. A tear slipped down her cheek. "No, they want me to work for them instead. They want to use me, not in a dangerous way. Nothing like that." She paused, choosing careful words that wouldn't break YouTube rules. "They want me to help with something illegal, something I can't refuse." Adrian felt his heart drop. "And if you don't, they'll take Anna." Elena nodded, trembling. The worst part wasn't the debt. It wasn't even the threat. It was how long she had been holding this alone, hiding all of it behind polite smiles and quiet nods. Adrian placed a hand on the table beside him, steadying his voice. "Elena, listen to me. I won't let anything happen to your daughter." "You can't promise that," she said painfully. "You don't understand how these people work. They don't stop. They don't care who gets in the way." A sharp knock echoed from down the hallway. Elena jumped, her breath catching instantly. Adrian turned his head. The knock came again, slow, deliberate, not frantic, not polite, a measured knock from someone who wasn't afraid. Elena's voice cracked. "It's him." Adrian moved toward the door, but she grabbed his sleeve, desperate. "Sir, please don't open it. Please. If he sees you with me, he'll know I told you." He stopped, torn between instinct and caution. The knock came again, louder this time. Anna appeared in the doorway of the laundry room, clutching the edge of the frame. Her eyes were wide and frightened. "Mama, he's back." Adrian's heartbeat quickened. He stepped closer to Elena, lowering his voice. "Go stand with Anna. Stay behind me." "No," Elena whispered urgently, shaking her head. "Sir, you can't confront him. You don't know what he's capable of." But the decision was no longer in Adrian's hands. Something deep inside him refused to let fear dictate the moment. He walked toward the main corridor, each step heavier than the last, the knock echoing again like a warning. As he neared the staff entrance, he saw the silhouette through the frosted glass. A tall figure, shoulders tense, head slightly tilted as if listening. He wasn't just knocking. He was waiting, anticipating, knowing they were on the other side. Adrian placed his hand on the handle, but he didn't open the door. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, watching the blurry outline. The man outside shifted, almost sensing him. Then, in a voice muffled through the door but clear enough to send a chill up Adrian's spine, the man spoke. "Tell Elena I'm not leaving. Not this time. And if she doesn't come out—" He paused. "Someone else will pay the price." Adrian stepped back, his breath catching. Behind him, Elena and Anna stood frozen in the hallway, silent, terrified, waiting for what would happen next. And for the first time, Adrian realized This wasn't just a debt. This wasn't just a threat. This was the moment everything would collide. And the worst part? The door hadn't even opened yet. Richard stood frozen, his breath shallow as the weight of everything he had just discovered pressed hard against his chest. The old greenhouse felt even smaller now, like the walls were inching closer with every second. Eleanor watched him carefully, her hands trembling a little, as if she sensed that something even bigger was about to unfold. The faint tapping of rain on the cracked glass didn't calm anything. It only made the silence more tense, more uneasy. For a moment, Richard thought that maybe this was the worst of it. Maybe the blinking red light, the hidden device, and the recordings were the only secrets buried in this place. But then the old metal door at the back of the greenhouse rattled softly. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sound came again, slow, cautious, as if someone was gently testing whether the door would open. Eleanor's eyes widened. Richard slowly raised a finger to his lips, motioning for her to stay still. His heartbeat felt loud enough to echo through the entire greenhouse. He stepped quietly toward the back, each movement slow and measured, trying not to make a sound. The soft tapping continued, not louder, just persistent, too deliberate to ignore. Just as he reached the far corner, a shadow crossed a thin strip of light under the door. Someone was standing outside. Richard felt a rush of cold through his spine. Whoever it was had followed them here, or worse, they had been here the whole time. Eleanor took a shaky step back, whispering his name, but he didn't answer. The shadow lingered for a long moment, unmoving, like it was listening. Then, without warning, the tapping stopped. Silence filled the space again, heavy and suffocating, leaving Richard unsure the person had walked away or was simply waiting. He reached for his phone, but the screen stayed black. Dead battery. Eleanor checked hers. No signal inside the greenhouse. The timing of it all felt too calculated. Then the second twist hit them, without warning. From the far shelf behind Richard came a soft mechanical click. Eleanor gasped as a second blinking light, one they hadn't noticed before, lit up from behind a stack of old seed trays. It wasn't a recorder. It was something else. Something newer. Richard stepped closer, and as he moved the trays aside, he saw a small transmitter and beside it, a neatly folded piece of paper with his name written in handwriting he recognized instantly. His legs nearly buckled. It was the same handwriting from a letter that had appeared inside his house earlier. The same handwriting that had started this whole nightmare. He opened the note with trembling fingers. Inside, only one line was written, simple but chilling enough to steal the air from his lungs. You're running out of time. Check the garden shed before they get there. Before who gets there? Richard turned sharply toward Eleanor. Her face had gone pale. She didn't need to say anything. They both felt the same thing, a sudden pressure spreading through their chests, a sense of being watched, hunted, pushed towards something they weren't ready to face. Outside, the wind picked up, but it wasn't just wind. They heard footsteps. More than one. Slow. Approaching. Richard grabbed Eleanor's hand. They didn't have a plan. They didn't even fully understand what they were involved in. But the message was clear. Someone else was already moving. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here. And whatever waited in that garden shed, it would decide everything. The tension tightened like a wire ready to snap as they slipped out the side door of the greenhouse, hearts racing, shadows stretching long across the yard. Everything was about to collide, and neither of them had any idea if they were heading toward the truth or straight into the trap someone had been setting for months. Richard and Eleanor ran through the dim yard, their breaths unsteady as the wind pushed against them. The garden shed stood at the far end of the property, small and quiet, almost too quiet. Every step toward it felt like walking deeper into a truth that had been chasing Richard for months. He could hear voices behind them now, soft, unclear, but getting closer. Whoever was following them was no longer hiding their presence. When they reached the shed, Richard pushed the door open, and a wave of cold air swept out. The tiny space was dark, except for a faint glow coming from a device sitting on the workbench. Eleanor switched on her phone flashlight, and the narrow beam trembled across the shelves. The room looked untouched, but something felt wrong, like someone had been there just moments ago. On the bench lay another envelope with Richard's name, the same familiar handwriting. His throat tightened as he opened it. Inside were several printed photos, all taken from angles that made his stomach twist. They were pictures of him, walking to work, standing at his front door, talking to Eleanor. Every moment looked like it had been captured from a distance. Quietly, patiently, Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth. "Richard, someone's been watching you for a long time." Before he could respond, the device next to the photos suddenly lit up, showing a small screen with a countdown ticking down from 30 seconds. Beneath it was a simple message: "Step outside. Now." For 1 tense second, they froze. Richard didn't know if the device was dangerous or just meant to scare them, but he didn't want to wait to find out. He grabbed the photos and pulled Eleanor outside. As soon as they stepped into the yard, the voices behind them grew clearer. 3 figures were moving quickly toward the shed, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Richard held Eleanor close as the countdown reached 0. Instead of an explosion, the shed lights flickered on and projection lit up the inside wall. A recording played. Audio of a conversation Richard recognized instantly. It was his own voice. But the other voice in the recording, that was a shock. It was Eleanor's brother, Daniel. Richard felt the ground shift under him. Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't seen Daniel in months, not since he disappeared under confusing circumstances. She had believed he left the country. But now, hearing his voice talking about keeping Richard safe from the wrong people made everything twist in a new direction. The 3 figures finally reached them, but instead of rushing forward, they stopped. As they lowered their flashlights, Richard recognized 2 of them, private investigators hired by Daniel months ago. The third stepped forward slowly. It was Daniel himself. He looked tired, thinner than Eleanor remembered, but his presence brought a strange calm to the chaos. "I'm sorry," Daniel said softly. "I never wanted it to reach this point. But someone close to Richard would set him up, and I needed him to see the truth on his own." Richard stared at him, confused. "Setting me up for what?" Daniel stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Someone wanted you blamed for something you didn't do. Someone inside your own company. I intercepted their plans, but I couldn't come out openly. It would have put you both in danger." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from relief and shock. Richard slowly began to understand. The recordings, the notes, the shadow in the greenhouse. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning, a way to pull him away from the trap being built around him. But just as that relief settled in, Daniel's expression changed. His eyes shifted past them, toward the dark path leading back to the main house. Richard followed his gaze, and his heart sank. Another figure was approaching. Someone Richard recognized. Someone he had trusted. His longtime co-worker, Adrian. Adrian stepped into the light with a calm smile, one that didn't match the situation at all. "Well," Adrian said quietly, "I guess we're all discovering things tonight." Eleanor instinctively stepped closer to Richard. Daniel's jaw tightened. Richard had always seen Adrian as a friend. Kind, loyal, the last person who had hurt him. But now, something in Adrian's eyes looked different. Calculated, cold, and before anyone could speak again, Adrian revealed a final truth that none of them expected. "You were never supposed to find any of this," he said softly. "And Richard, you were never supposed to be the one in danger." He paused, letting the words sink in. It was Eleanor. The world seemed to stop. The twist hit harder than anything before, because suddenly everything made sense in a way they never imagined. And Richard realized a real story had only just revealed its sharpest edge. Richard felt the ground tilt beneath him as Adrian's words hung in the air. It was as if every sound in the yard had vanished, leaving only the echo of that shocking sentence. Eleanor instinctively stepped back, her hand trembling in Richard's. Daniel shifted his stance, subtly positioning himself between Adrian and the rest of them. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The cold night breeze brushed past, making the trees whisper softly, as though even nature felt the tension. Richard finally managed to say, "Eleanor? Why would she be the one in danger?" Adrian's calm expression didn't change. "Because she wasn't supposed to be here. None of this involved you, Richard. Not at first. Everything started months ago, before you even hired her mother as your maid. Eleanor shook her head, trying to make sense of it. I was just living my life. I never did anything to anyone. You didn't, Adrian replied, a strange mix of regret and calculation in his voice. But you were connected to someone who did. Daniel clenched his fists. If you knew she was in danger, why didn't you come to us? Why hide behind all this? Adrian looked at him with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Because the danger didn't come from outside. It came from her past. Her father and the people he was involved with. Eleanor's face tightened with pain. Her father's disappearance had always been a quiet shadow in her life, a story her mother never fully explained. Richard gently squeezed her hand, feeling the fear ripple through her. Adrian continued speaking, and his tone softened slightly. Your father wasn't a bad man, Eleanor, but he got tangled in something he couldn't escape. Before he disappeared, he handed over sensitive information that threatened powerful people. For years it stayed buried, forgotten, until recently. Richard's chest tightened. And they think Eleanor has it? They don't know where it went, Adrian explained. But they believe her father would have passed it to the nearest person he trusted. That person was her mother. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. My mother never told me anything. I know, Adrian said quietly. She kept you safe by keeping you unaware. But someone realized she worked in your house. Richard. They assumed you might have access to her things. That's when you became part of the picture. That's why Daniel stepped in. That's why the notes, the recordings, the surveillance. Everything was to make sure you didn't fall into their hands. Richard felt a wave of relief and anger collide in him. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why let me think someone was trying to hurt me? Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady but heavy. Because we didn't know who we could trust. And because the moment we revealed anything, those watching would know we were aware of them. Staying quiet kept us one step ahead. Eleanor wiped her eyes. So everything, all the fear, all the confusion, it was because of something that happened long before I even understood it? Adrian nodded. And because someone wanted to find that information before anyone else could. Richard took a step closer to Adrian. And what about you? Why are you involved? Adrian exhaled slowly, the first sign of exhaustion on his face. I worked with those people years ago. I didn't know what they were doing until it was too late. When I realized they were after Eleanor, I tried to protect her in my own way. I pushed them off your trail as long as I could. But they're getting desperate now. They're running out of time. And so are you. The honesty in Adrian's voice surprised everyone, but it didn't erase the emotions circling the group. Fear, anger, relief, and uncertainty. Daniel gestured toward the house. We can't stay out here. Too exposed. They all moved inside, tension still wrapped around them like a tight rope. In the living room, under the soft glow of the chandelier, everything felt sharper, clearer. Richard locked the doors while Daniel checked the windows. Adrian stood near the fireplace, his expression thoughtful. Your father left something behind, Eleanor. Something that can close this chapter for good. Eleanor swallowed hard. What is it? A small USB drive, Adrian replied. Encrypted, containing evidence of the crimes he discovered. And if we find it, everything ends. Richard looked at Eleanor, then at Adrian. So where do we start? Eleanor suddenly remembered something. An old wooden box her mother kept hidden in her room, tucked behind clothes she rarely wore. She never thought much of it, but now the memory snapped into focus. My mother has a box, she said quietly. She never let me touch it. She said it was the last gift from my father. Maybe that's where it is. Daniel nodded. Then that's where we look. Richard called a maid, who was still awake after the frightening commotion earlier. She brought the box downstairs, hands shaking. Eleanor took it with a deep breath and opened it slowly. Inside was a folded scarf, a faded photograph of her parents, and a tiny wooden ornament she remembered from childhood. Beneath them was a padded cloth pouch. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a small USB drive. The room went still as she held it up. Adrian's eyes widened with genuine surprise. That's it. Daniel stepped forward. We need to see what's on it, But carefully. If it's what they're looking for, this can end all of it. Richard fetched his laptop, setting it on the coffee table. Everyone gathered around as Daniel connected the USB. The screen flickered, then loaded a set of plain folders with dates and names. Evidence, statements, documents outlining what Eleanor's father had discovered. Adrian let out a long breath. This is enough to protect you, to expose them. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, relief pouring over her like a slow sunrise after a long storm. So it's over? Almost, Daniel replied. Once this is handed over to the right people, they won't come after you again. Richard wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You're safe now. In that moment, the tension that had held them for so long finally began to loosen. The air felt different, lighter. Eleanor leaned into Richard, finally able to breathe without fear. Adrian stepped away from the group, his voice softer than before. I'll disappear after tonight. They can't trace this back to you. This is my chance to make things right. Eleanor looked at him with gratitude, despite everything that had happened. Thank you for helping us. He nodded, eyes glistening for the first time. Take care of each other. And don't let the past define your future. With that, Adrian walked out into the quiet night, leaving the rest of them standing together in the warm glow of the living room. Daniel turned to Eleanor and Richard. You two deserve peace now. Let this be the start of it. Eleanor hugged her brother tightly, tears finally falling without fear. Richard watched them, feeling something shift inside him, an unexpected sense of hope, of possibility, of a future where none of them had to look over their shoulders again. The storm that had followed them for months had finally passed, and in its place was a quiet, steady calm, a reminder that sometimes the truth doesn't break you. Sometimes it frees you.